Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. How are you tonight? So glad you're here. David, thank you for that perfectly put introduction to this program. We could not be more thrilled to be talking about information, the quality of information, and how valuable it is to all of us. And to do that here in this beautiful auditorium in this phenomenal DC Public Library is an honor, and we are very glad to be here. So as David said, I am Neil Brown. I am the president of the Poynter Institute, which is based in St. Petersburg, Florida. Florida, which is actually a little cooler than DC is today. I'd like to thank, as we get going tonight, our great team at Poynter, including the staff of MediaWise, our media literacy project, which put together the Moments of Truth exhibit. I hope you've all had a chance to look through some of it and this week and tonight. It's a hard effort that I know you're all here because you care deeply about accuracy and truth in our society. I also want to thank the Poynter events team, which has done such a great job in working with the library team to put this event together tonight. As we celebrate the history and the future of journalism here in our nation's capital, I'd like to take a moment to tell you just a little bit about Poynter and why we're even here tonight. Founded in 1975 and celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, Poynter is a nonprofit dedicated to strengthening journalism in service to democracy. At a time when trust in news is fragile and misinformation spreads faster than ever, our work ensures that everyone has access to facts and that the tools that make informed choices, that help us make informed choices in our daily lives, guided by our own values, that we have access to that level of quality information. Through programs like MediaWise, Poynter teaches people of all ages to sort out fact from fiction online. As we all know, not that easy. Poynter trains journalists worldwide to uphold the highest standards of accuracy and ethics. We strengthen local news organizations, including public media stations that you all listen to help them all serve their audiences better. We are home to PolitiFact, the fact-checking newsroom that has been holding politicians accountable since 2007. With partners including Microsoft, TikTok, and the Associated Press, Poynter is leading global efforts to establish ethical standards for the use of artificial intelligence in journalism. We are dedicated to helping ensure that news consumers can find trustworthy information in a changing world. I invite you to learn more about Poynter. Whether you're a journalist, an educator, a citizen who cares, we're so glad you're here. Please go to visit poynter.org and you'll get even more information about why the work we're doing, we believe, is fundamental to our working democracy. Now tonight, I hope you've had the chance to go to see this project, Moments of Truth. Long before journalism as we know it today took shape, the need to tell our stories and share the truth of our world has been central to the human experience. Across time, we've created the tools and techniques we need to communicate the information that shapes our lives. Journalism is a vital part of that tradition. This exhibit traces the evolution of journalism over the past 1,000 years, and with it, the ongoing struggle to find facts amid all the noise. What becomes clear through this history is that a free press with high-quality journalism committed to factual reporting remains a critical way to hold those in power accountable. And it is our best defense against misinformation. That is a truth that is present then and now. History offers context, helping us understand where we've been, and it is often said that journalism is the first rough draft of history. But in today's digital world, content is created constantly, speedily, and technology evolves so rapidly that protecting press freedom and finding trustworthy sources feels tougher than ever before. In the exhibit, the Prime Minister of Australia is wisely quoted as saying, "It's not a 24-hour news cycle, it's a 60-second news cycle." So in today's world, how can we make sense of it all? And what comes next? That's what we've asked our panelists to talk with us about tonight. So let me thank you all for being here, all of you and our panelists. And now please let me introduce our panelists. Lori Montenegro is Noticias Telemundo's Washington bureau chief, overseeing news coverage from the nation's capital, including White House and domestic and foreign policy reporting. One of the most influential journalists in Spanish language television, Lori has more than 40 years of experience in the news industry. Tia Mitchell is Washington bureau chief for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, covering national politics for a Georgia audience. She is co-host of the AJC's Politically Georgia podcast. Tia also shares her political expertise on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. Chris Wallace is a multiple Emmy-winning broadcaster and television anchor whose legendary 5-decade-long career has included time at ABC, NBC, and Fox News. Most recently, he was at CNN, where he spent 3 years as the host of The Chris Wallace Show. As a point of pride for us at Poynter, Chris was awarded the Poynter Medal for Lifetime Achievement in Journalism in 2021 for the significant impact his career has had on our profession. Please welcome these panelists up to our stage. Thank you. Woo-hoo. Well, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
We're so glad you're here. So we're going to have a little conversation up here on stage, and we'll hit some questions. But I want all of you out there to be thinking of your own questions, because we want this to be truly a conversation. And there's so much going on. It is a complicated and polarized and, did I say complicated, world we're in, and we want to sort of pick it apart. So we're going to start with a general question to each of you about the world of journalism. Journalism has been under a lot of attack. Press freedoms are under attack. But there's a lot of really interesting and good work going on. And then there's some things that we have to hold ourselves accountable for, too. So I was wondering if each of you could talk about an example of what you think journalism is doing well right now. And then I'm going to ask you to think about what you think we could be doing better. So, Lori, why don't we start with you?
I knew it. I should have never gone like this.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you got...
So what are we doing well? I think we're sticking to our guns as much as possible, and we're telling stories. We're telling people stories, which is a privilege. I always say that it's a privilege to sit down and talk to people and interview people and expand their voices. That's what I believe we're doing good. And I think actually the press is working very hard at holding itself accountable. I think fact-checking, as I was looking at the exhibit, fact-checking started a long time ago. And I am pleased to see so many entities, broadcast, print entities, that are really leaning into and investing in new units to fact-check the information and bring context to the stories and the issues that we're telling.
Okay, and what do you think we need to do a little better?
I think sometimes we need to take a step back, and I understand that we want to be first, but sometimes first is wrong, and we need to really, I think I would rather us be right than give wrong information, because wrong information can have consequences, and people may not stay around for you to correct yourself, be it in a newspaper article or be it, broadcast, radio. And we have to be very careful, especially when you're talking about, breaking news. And it can be anything, a war, it could be, riots, it could be a natural disaster. I just would like to see us take a step back and be more deliberate at being slow and making sure that we do have all of the facts.
Accuracy over speed.
Yes.
Chris, doing well, doing not so well?
I'm not as optimistic or, or as positive about the performance of the media today as Lori is. And I want to put it in the context of my own long career. I get stopped a lot these days, and have actually for years, by people who come up to me and say, thank you for your journalism, thank you for being even-handed, thank you for being fair. And while I like praise as much as the next person, I actually find that a very disturbing commentary on the news business, because when I started at the Boston Globe 56 years ago, being fair, getting your facts right, playing it straight, being even-handed wasn't a subject of praise. It was what kept you from getting fired. It was the very least that and being accurate. Nobody gave you any praise for not taking sides. Nobody gave you any praise for trying to play it down the middle. And now it kind of stands out. And I think that is an enormously sad commentary on the state of the news business today. That should be something that people remark, is worthy of praise.
56. But you're right. I mean, the world is sort of, that's what we now debate. That should be a given, I guess. Tia, what do you think?
I think that the media does a really good job these days of doing it all. Like, maybe not every media organization is able to do it all, but no matter what you're looking for, it can be found within the media landscape. So I think we do a really good job providing value, whether it's investigations, great storytelling, culture and people. There's always so many great articles that you're coming across and you're like, oh wow, journalism is constantly finding new and interesting things to report about, and that makes me really, really proud of the industry. We do provide value. And every time someone says, why isn't the media covering this? You're like, well, how do you think you know about it? To ask why the media isn't covering it. So, but kind of the other side to that coin is I think we need to do a better job differentiating ourselves from content, differentiating ourselves from people talking about the news doesn't make them a journalist. People providing commentary in their own analysis, even recaps and aggregation aren't necessarily journalism. Journalism means you're providing original content based on research and interviewing and trying to uncover new truths. And that's not always the intent of things people consume and assume it's journalism. So I think we have to do a better job of differentiating ourselves. And the other thing I said, we provide a lot of value, but I think we have to do a better job getting people to recognize that value and to invest in journalism, whether it's with their money or whether it's with their trust and their attention. And I think that's really where our industry has a lot of work to do.
Can I just jump in for a second?
I wanna
Please.
jump in. Go ahead,
No,
go ahead. No,
well,
no.
I was just going to say, we're going to have a nice highfalutin talk about journalism today, but I was watching Tia over the last half hour, and this is journalism, because she came in and she has spent all day up on Capitol Hill on the intricacies of the Big Beautiful Bill Act that is before the House, and there's a procedural vote before the rule vote, before the vote on the merits of the bill. And from the moment she came in, she was like, oh my gosh, I wonder what's going to happen, and am I going to miss something? And during the entire time we've been here, she's been on her phone working away, talking to sources, like where does it stand and who's doing what, and that's journalism. And that's what we're really talking about here, is working sources and sweating whether you're going to be there when some development happens, and having to make deadlines, and my hat's off to you. And
Thank you.
And my hat's off to you, but I'm really glad I'm not doing what you're doing right now.
So what I wanted to jump in and say, and Chris is right, and we had a conversation about this back in the green room, and I was telling him, listen, I don't think that we are inventing the wheel here. The wheel has already been invented, and journalism really needs to stick to what journalism is. It's the who, the what, the where, and the why. And that's what we really need to stick to. But Tia said something that's very important, and that is, why isn't the media covering this story? Well, a lot of times the media is covering the story, and the person asking that question just doesn't like the way that story is being covered, because they maybe think that you have to have a certain angle, or you have to interview a certain person, or why didn't you interview that person? And that goes to what Chris is talking about. We have fallen into a very dangerous landscape in where we have, and it's a shame to say it, where if you really want to be informed, you have to be reading different newspapers with different angles or slants, or you have to watch a certain newscast to maybe, hear what you want to hear. And that is really not what journalism is supposed to be about. I don't think that we should be telling people what to think in our reporting. We need to present the facts, tell the story, and I believe that the audience is smart enough, the American people are smart enough to make their own decisions.
Well, I think you guys have just been so perfectly eloquent on it. And Tia, the idea of value, I think, is so important. What's valuable is finding out something I didn't already know, doing the level of reporting that Chris just described, diversity of sources that Lori did. One of the challenges we've got going forward, and I want to test this with you guys, is this sentence, which I think all of us have heard a lot, and to our frustration. Facts don't matter anymore. People say this with some unfortunate regularity. So I'm reminded that during the pandemic, there was a false report that some nurses in Philadelphia were extorting money in return for treating people who were desperately sick. And two clergymen got wind of this, who were supportive of these. They knew this was false rumors, and so they published a report that said, called on people in society to please step forward to present the facts as they really were. Okay, now that actual anecdote is from 1793. I got it out of the exhibit. Okay? So this collision of facts and the role of journalism isn't entirely new, but I feel like we've hit another era for it.
Well, we have people.
So what can we do about this narrative to turn that back?
Not only what can we do about it, we have people who are actually questioning the facts, questioning the data. And so it's a huge challenge. And what can we do? Well, I think one of the things that we can do is something that Telemundo did with Poynter, which is MediaWise. And we did many capsules in Spanish to bring information to our audience that was accurate. And for speaking now for Hispanic journalists, I think that one of the things that kind of disturbs me and puts us in a quandary is that so much is invested in fact-checking in English, but I don't think it's the same level is done in Spanish and for Spanish speakers. And we know that in this last election, disinformation in the Hispanic community was crazy, it was wild. I mean, I was listening to my own family members, and I was just like, what are you reading? What are you watching? Who are you listening to? And a lot of it was, well, I saw it on WhatsApp.
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, I remember I was working at the paper in Jacksonville covering Florida state government, and I had a political column at the time, and I wrote a column back in like 2015 about how I was noticing that in the Florida state legislature, you started to have Republicans and Democrats couldn't agree on the policy because they couldn't even agree on the facts of which to base their decision on. And if you can't agree on, like, you can't have a fight, and, you know, not a physical fight, but you can't even have a debate, if you will, if you can't agree on the rules of engagement. And that was before Donald Trump. And we all know Donald Trump came in and was able to take advantage of that, quite frankly, the political landscape and the polarization that existed, and take it to a new level and find success with it, which only empowered politicians after him to dig in any deeper. And so it's not to me that facts don't matter, it's that people have seen that you can have success by disregarding the facts when it's convenient for you, or putting the facts to the side if that's getting in the way of your success, whether that's getting policies passed. Look at, again, the big, beautiful bill. Republicans are saying, no, it doesn't contribute more to the deficit, or they'll say, no, we're not taking away people's Medicaid, and they're choosing to not engage with the facts. And the other part I want to say about the facts is that the facts matter, but the other kind of along the lines of this change in politics, what people have learned is that they can move the needle with the Hispanic community, not necessarily by wagering in facts, but wagering in things that get your emotions revved
yeah.
up, and you know, messing with your head and the right algorithm and all these other things that can, again, contribute to their success, because unfortunately it's been less about the integrity of the fight and more about winning at all costs. And I'm talking about in politics, but I guess in other realms too. And again, it's not just the Hispanic community, you know, your Uncle Bob, you know, and scrolling Facebook, if it resonates, that AI image is something they take as facts, you know, and that to me is what's scary, is that you can manipulate people's emotions and brains and rewire them to believe a thing without facts being part of that consideration.
I think we do have to distinguish, though, when you talk about Republicans, for instance, talking about what the impact of the big, beautiful bill, and I promise that's the last time I will use that phrase.
I can't promise that.
You know, politicians have always lied, and I don't. It's just the nature of the beast that they're going to tell their story with spin and, you know, emphasize the positive and de-emphasize the negative, as the song goes. And you know, the key is what is going on in the media. And you know, I was quoting this earlier, talking to the Poynter interns. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the famous late senator from New York, used to say, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And the problem is that it isn't just the politicians, but media now presents, in too many cases, a specific story that skews the debate in a particular way. And I think the polarization we see in society, the polarization we see in our politics, is led to the polarization we see in the media. And the result is that we don't end up with a common set of facts. You know, it'd be one thing, I have no problem with people disagreeing on their opinion, but if they can't even agree on what the facts are on which they base their opinion,
Yeah.
then the possibility of an intelligent and constructive debate and potentially compromise and progress is almost impossible.
But don't you think that in more modern political history, elected officials, politicians are more willing to be caught not dealing in the facts. I mean, it used to be if PolitiFact called you out, early days of PolitiFact, I feel like people say, oh, okay, we must have got that wrong. We won't repeat that anymore. Whereas now, it's pants
They double down.
They double down, even if it's like pants on fire and provable, they still say it anyways, repeatedly. And I just feel like that's a shift.
Well,
Not only a shift, I think that I want to say that this goes beyond the media. I think this goes to people's character and their integrity. And for me, the problem is that a lot of people are willing to just stand there and continue to say that the sky is green when they know it's blue, and they will continue to look you in the eye and say the sky is green. And then when you repeat that over and over and over and over again, that's when you start to move the needle, you shift, people react to emotions. I think a lot of it has to do with, have we lost our way as a society so much that you don't care if you say a lie and if you get caught in it? That's the bigger question for me.
well, there's a book that I would commend you. It was written about 5 years ago by Ezra Klein called Why We're Polarized. And what he basically posits is that it isn't that we have two different parties or that we have two different political philosophies, liberal and conservative. He basically says that we're two different tribes. And what divides us, what tribe you're in, defines not only what you believe in politically, it's what media you consume, it's what parts of the country you live in, it's where you eat, whether you pray, and if so, where you pray. And one of the other interesting things that he says in it is that people are driven less by the tribe that they are in and wanting them to succeed than they are by wanting the other tribe, the tribe that they're not in, not to succeed, because their greatest fear isn't that their tribe rules things and runs things, but that the other tribe is going to run things and they're going to be under their thumb. And there's a very interesting political calculation, which until a few years ago I was unaware of. And what some political scientists have done is to divide the country and see where various factions are going. You know, obviously there are all kinds of exit polls, young, old, white, black, straight, gay, whatever. They do it by counties that have a Whole Foods in them and counties that have a Cracker Barrel in them. Swear to God. And it turns out that the Democrats do better by about 50 points in the Whole Foods counties, and the Republicans do better by about 50 points in the Cracker Barrel counties. And, you know, which has nothing to do with politics, but it does have everything to do with tribe. And it was bad in 2016. It was worse in 2020, and it was more so. The divide between the Cracker Barrel and Whole Foods counties, it's over 50% now. So, I mean, that's it. First of all, it says something about how incredibly culturally, socially, ideologically, politically, religiously we're divided. And to bring this back to what we're talking about today, which is the news business, it is the news business. And in a way that wasn't necessarily true a long time ago, news organizations now realize that the market rewards them if they present a point of view and they offer themselves up to an audience as, we're going to tell you what you want to hear. We're on your side. And that isn't, as I remember, so much what people were looking for 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's very much what people are looking for today.
We were just, Chris, remember a moment ago we were talking about how the role of journalism often was to be contrarian.
Right.
And what you're suggesting now is we are trying to placate an audience almost, or maybe
Or
not.
pander.
No, pander's a more direct word. Yeah, it's trickier. Well, let's sticking with facts for a second and fact checking. You, as all very distinguished and accomplished journalists, do you believe? I'll start with you, Chris. You've moderated presidential debates. Do you believe in fact checking your sources while you're in real time, like you're?
Like in a presidential debate?
Presidential
I
debate.
got in a lot of trouble. Trouble isn't the right word. I got controversy after I was asked to moderate the 2016 debate between Clinton and Trump, and it was the first time that a Fox journalist had ever been asked to moderate a general election presidential debate. And I was asked by a reporter, do you intend to fact check? And I said no. And I got a lot of blowback about it. I feel more strongly about it today than ever. You know, if I'm doing an interview, if I'm interviewing you and I think that you've said, Neil, something that I disagree with, or that I disagree with the fact, the premise of what you're saying, I will call you on it. But in a debate, my job, I believe, is, as a moderator, is to be as a facilitator of a conversation between the two candidates and to be as invisible as possible. I came to the view that the perfect debate moderator, people would say afterwards, that was a great debate. Was there even a moderator for that debate? That you'd be almost invisible. And I think to make a judgment in the middle of a presidential debate, I'm going to fact check Trump. You know, does it have to be a whopper? Can it be a parking ticket? Does it have to be a capital offense? And if I fact check him, as I say, I think all politicians lie or spin things to their benefit, then what do I do with Clinton? And you know, my feeling was it's up to the other candidate to fact check. I'm not going to do that.
So, Tia and Laurie, when you're interviewing sources, how do you handle that?
That's different.
I think it's different. I mean, I have a podcast that at one point was a live radio show. Now it's not live. We tape it in advance, but we don't really edit it, so it's pretty much the real-time interview. And I don't necessarily feel like my role is to fact-check everything they say. However, in the course of the conversation, I think sometimes it kind of begs a little bit of course correction. And I'll give you an example. Recently, I was talking to the president of the Log Cabin Republicans in one of the counties around Atlanta. And there had been a little bit of a controversy because they were initially excluded from the local Pride Parade. And of course, the Pride organization said, you know, this year we're not going to let any political parties participate. But the Log Cabin Republicans, it was a rule put in place clearly to keep the Log Cabin Republicans out. And they threatened to sue. And as a result, there was some negotiations, and the Log Cabin Republicans were allowed to participate, but with some guidelines that they would be respectful and keep it a safe space and things like that. So we invited the Log Cabin Republican president onto our podcast, and he was like, yeah, because I don't know why they would want to exclude us. The Republican Party has been working so hard on LGBTQ rights. And I said, now wait a minute, sir. If you had said LGBTQ, I might have let you rock. But the T, we're in 2025, and we're talking about the Republican Party. And not just nationally, but in Georgia, there have been recent laws to limit the rights of transgender people. So how can you say that? And I didn't, you know, I wasn't trying to antagonize him. I wasn't trying to make him feel bad. But if we're going to have a conversation and keep it honest and keep it constructive, then I feel obligated to say the thing that I think my readers, if as they're listening, would go, now wait a minute, LGBT, the T? You know, and so I feel like, again, you're not going to catch everything in real time. And that's what makes it so hard to moderate these debates, because you are in real time making all these decisions in your brain while an audience of millions of people watch you. It's very difficult. So you can't catch everything. People are never going to be satisfied. They're always going to think you fact-checked too much, you didn't fact-check enough. They're going to catch something that the person said wrong that you let ride out, and that happens on my podcast all the time. But I think sometimes if you catch it in your brain and it catches you, then I think you should just, you know, again, it's right for a follow-up. Maybe not a fact check, but a follow-up, maybe a clarification.
Laurie?
I think it depends on the circumstance. It's a presidential debate. It's like Tia just said, you have a lot of things going. You're looking at the time. You got to get to different subjects, and so you can't catch everything. In a podcast, maybe it depends on who you're interviewing. I just think it's a circumstance, but I think when you're doing any kind of interview, at least what I used to do, was if I'm interviewing a congressman and he's saying something to me that I know was not correct or is misrepresenting something, I think that it is fair in a follow-up question, because that's really where you would do it in a very respectful manner. You can come back and you can challenge what they're saying in a respectful manner without having to get into a debate with them. I think that is part of journalistic responsibility. That's what any journalist with worth their salt, I think you say in English, should do. And if you don't do that and you don't challenge them, then I don't think we're really doing our audience, we're doing our audience a disservice.
Well, one of the things that's kind of fun about the podcast forum and what you're all saying is, that conversation you described, that's kind of an interesting conversation in both directions. It doesn't always have to be a gotcha or I nailed you with this fact change, but like, how do you explain it? And the podcast forum, I think, allows for sort of like, well, let's hear what he or she says in response. And that's part of the information universe. But the thing you got at, Chris, is I think interesting for us to kick around. We've sort of been trained not to be the story, right? You talk about the invisible moderator essentially there, right? And yet, increasingly, we're drawn in as characters with a lot of the folks we cover. I'm thinking now of the situation, I'd love your reaction to all of you. Secretary of Defense takes great exception, that's putting it gently, to coverage. And he attacks a reporter, and now the reporter has to push back. This would be either Fox or CNN, but 3 or 4 in the last week. Have you ever seen an environment this hostile, and how do we respond if we're also taught to not be the story ourselves? Chris, you first.
I thought when Hegseth attacked the Pentagon press corps in general, and my former colleague Jennifer Griffin in particular, I thought they were much more self-controlled and measured than I would have been. I would have been really offended by it, and and I probably would have barked back at him, which probably wouldn't have been the wisest thing to do. I thought they handled it well, which is to let Hegseth say what he wanted to say. I think people in the audience, the national audience who heard it, made their own opinion as to what they thought of the validity of Hegseth saying that. And I think it was a big time. It was the first press conference since, well, maybe it was the second press conference at the Pentagon since the Iran bombing, and probably better to stick to the facts than to get into a food fight, although I would have been really tempted to get into a food fight.
I think the press there was, they were very smart. They were wise. They just let him say what he wanted to say. I think they were actually probably expecting it, or they knew that he was going to, let off steam about something. But the beauty of that, and the beauty of journalism in our country, is that once he was done, they raised their hands and they asked the questions that they had to ask.
Yeah.
And that's the big picture.
Because sometimes the attacks, and I do want to say, she did defend herself, but she defended herself and then she moved on. It wasn't a dwelling on that attack, because I do think sometimes the attacks on the media are almost a ploy to get us off of our game so that we don't focus on the main thing, which is we need to ask you questions about bombing this foreign country and if we're headed to war. That's what we're here for. We're not necessarily here for your opinion on our coverage, even though if you have a concern, let's talk about it, And I think that's something I've had to learn. Again, I cover Georgia's delegation, which means I talk a lot to Marjorie Taylor Greene. And we have a great relationship. She's actually one of my better sources she's one of the most accessible members of the delegation. And she gives most of the time thoughtful and measured and, thought out. I know, look at people like, what? That's because you guys see the viral moments when she's going off on the member of the media, but that's not what always happens. And I've had to learn, just like you do with any other source, there's a way to ask Marjorie Taylor Greene a question that gets a good answer, and there's a way to ask her a question that gets her riled up. And if you want a video of her riled up and you want her to call you out and it to go viral, you can do that. And when that's happened to me, that wasn't my intent or my intended outcome. But if it happens, I'm not saying I'm scared of it, but I'm saying I approach her in a way that that's not my intended outcome, because again, I want the answers to the questions, not to get into a back and forth with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
And I'm so happy Tia just gave that example of Marjorie Taylor Greene, because I too have run across her when I leave my office, which I try to do as much as possible during the week, because sitting down and being the bureau chief, I don't want to ever lose contact and the sensibilities of telling a story and getting to the issues. It's really important to talk to people who are not just in the newsroom. But going back to, I'm so happy that you said that, because I think that one of the things that the press needs to do a better job at is explaining how we do our job and how we, how do we get sources? How do we decide what we're going to cover in the morning, and what it takes to bring that story to the viewers or to the readers. And the fact that you just shared that, and everybody, I heard back there, I heard somebody go, is very interesting, because there are politicians who like the show. Sometimes they love the show, but they also know when to behave, and they also know when to give the answers that are needed. And our politics is local, and they're both from Georgia, and she knows exactly what Tia is going to be writing, and she needs to respond to her constituents. So I'm glad you shared that.
Because the show is for a certain audience. Pete, when Secretary Hegseth picks a fight with a Fox News reporter, that's for a certain audience, right? That it's going to resonate with and say, yeah, stick it to the media, the lying liberal media. But have you all noticed how much President Trump loves to talk to the lying liberal media? He gives so many just gaggles and goes to the back of Air Force One off the record. He talks to the media all the time. He always has loved media coverage. And so you got to think about, who does it serve when he tries to paint the media in this negative light, the same media that he is really courted and really wanted that coverage.
There's the performance, and then there's the relationship, and he knows how to navigate both. So I want you all to be thinking, if you have any questions, we've got microphones up here, and we're going to take your questions after the next one. So
That hand's going up already.
woohoo, good. So let's build on what you just said, just in one little way, because I think it's important and needs to be acknowledged. So there's the performance and there's the attacks on us, but they have some consequences. There are journalists and those who have contrary views feeling harassed, threatened, attacked. How are you thinking about that consequence of the performance? And do we need to do more about that?
Are you talking about, am I worried about my security?
Security,
I'm a dope, no.
The venomous emails that are really harsh. I mean, we got people, it's not easy.
I can't remember, I hope it continues through this evening, I can't remember a really unpleasant conversation. I find when people come up to me, recognize me, they want to say something nice. They don't want to come up and say something lousy. And I do remember I was doing a lot of investigative reporting when I was at NBC at one point. No, it was ABC. If you have a 50-year career, you mix up networks every once in a while. And it was at ABC, and my kids were little. And I used to think, what if somebody came up to them and I would start to describe, I was doing a certain kind of story about a certain group, and I'd say, well, look, if somebody comes up and they look this way, run for your lives or something. And then I had done so many stories on so many different groups that I had ticked off that I said, kids, you'll be fine. And maybe I'm foolish, but I have never particularly worried about that.
I mean, it's scary at times. You would be surprised at what people who know you through a TV screen or know you through the podcast, what they think they can email you.
Oh, well, that's different.
And
That's different.
But sometimes I have received some scary DMs on social media, and you just never know, especially, again, when people decide to attack you for a certain audience, there are ramifications that comes with that. And that is the part that I wish some of these elected officials would think about before they do kind of sick their base on the person at the moment. There have been a lot of journalists who have been on, targeted because either President Trump or a prominent person called them out. It is, and again, unfortunately, political violence has always been around, but media is a dangerous job. Not so much in America comparatively, but it can be a dangerous job, so it kind of comes with the territory. I don't think we center it much. And quite frankly, members of Congress are also concerned about the effects of these attacks and the polarization.
I think it is scary out there, especially when I was reporting. I remember started to feel some of this way back in like 2015. I remember going to a convention, and we were at the Texas delegation, and I had never, for the first time, felt so much hostility from people who were like, why don't you get out of here? And they were in our face, they were pushing my cameraman, they just didn't want to talk to us. And I had never faced that before. And I remember looking over my shoulder, standing at the corner of 400 North Capitol Street Northwest, and jumping because somebody honked their horn, but thinking that I have to watch my back. And nowadays, members of the media they're putting us through training. They're putting reporters, field reporters and producers and cameramen through security trainings and telling them, when you go out and cover certain protests, do not wear your badge. Don't wear a lanyard that says, in my case, Telemundo, or my colleagues at NBC, they're telling us, do not become visible. And that's scary and
It used to be
very
that the
sad.
badge was a sign of protection.
Exactly.
We have some questions from the audience. Right here. Brittany, right behind you there. Oh.
Thanks. Wonderful conversation, wonderful hearing you gals. I've been a journalist for also about 40 years. The last 20 years I've covered Congress for Hispanic magazine, and my main beat has been immigration. And oh my God, the misinformation, but I don't like to use that word, I use the word confusion about facts in immigration is just unbelievable. And to me, the biggest problem, and I just don't know what to do about it, are the narratives that are so stuck and yet are so untrue. And just let me give you an example from Poynter. I worked for CQ for a while, and it was wonderful having Poynter there as a kind of a ethical base. And one of the things we were told at CQ is don't ever call anybody or anything anti unless they self-describe. And it was a pretty high bar, because the only group that really self-described themselves as anti were anti-abortion people. And yet, even CQ, everybody calls anybody who seems to want to enforce immigration law, they call them anti-immigrant. And it's just wrong, and it really pisses people off. There's other things like the DACA executive order. Everybody says that DACAs are young people who were brought in illegally by their parents at a young age. Not one of those words exists in the 2 pages, only 2 pages, the DACA memo. The real definition is anybody who came in before the age of 16. Now, came in and brought in are 2 really different verbs, and one is much more emotional.
Words matter. That's certainly one of our
So
things.
what do you do about changing the narrative that is so solid and so wrong?
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for
Thank you for that question.
for your work. You know, we struggle with that all the time. Even in Hispanic media, we have to be very careful with the narratives that we put out there. And I'm a very big stickler with regards to video. And we fall into the trap. Sometimes, every time we want to talk about immigration, we want to put images of thousands of people crossing the border, running, and you know, we have to constantly watch that in the headlines. That is one of the greatest challenges, because I don't think it's only a narrative that has to do with immigration. I think it's a narrative that has to do with other also issues. For example, the abortion issue is another hot one where narratives do matter. I think we can just only continue to do what we do and try to present immigration in the best possible way that we can, but also, you know, focusing and harping on things that we know that are true and are misrepresented. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that immigrants come to this country and that they, you know, access benefits. And they don't. It's not true. And there's facts, there's numbers, there's statistics. And the only thing that we can continue to do as Hispanic media is just to continue to give the good fight, give the information out, and go from there. That is what we do on a daily basis. I think
Other
you have a
questions?
follow-up.
We got a lot of hands up.
Hi. So my question is about, with the advent of social media, people have decided that the paywall behind journalism is something that they don't want to pay for. And so they look for these sources that are not fact-checkable. They are essentially influencers or people who have a large following on social media and can say whatever they want. And what do you guys have to say about that when it comes to finding reputable sources for accurate information and looking to these sources that actually tell the true story versus people who are saying what they want to get that social media attention?
So first of all, I just have a pinned tweet on my X account. It's like, if you keep hitting that paywall, consider going ahead and putting your credit card down, because clearly you like that media outlet. You know, most media outlets have metered paywalls, so you're not going to hit it the first time, maybe not the second time. But if you go 3 times in a month, they're going to hit you, and they're going to say, we see you like it here. And I get it. Not everyone can afford it. Another pro tip, your library card gets you a lot of those newspapers, gets you a library card. Come on, DC Library. Okay. But I understand not everyone has the resources. I get it. You got to find it. If you got to find it for free, there are plenty of outlets that do not have paywalls. CNN doesn't really have a paywall, for example. That's just one example. Fox News doesn't have a paywall, for example. Social media. This is what I tell people about media literacy. Once you see someone is not credible because you've seen them give you some information and you later realize what they said was not accurate, or people are in the comments correcting them and they're deleting comments, or they're ignoring all the fact checks in the comments, or people have asked them to cite their sources. Where did you learn that information? And they refuse to cite a source. It's they said, people said, and even in the comments when people are asking, what's your source, and they won't engage. We have to learn to say, I can no longer treat this person as a credible source for information. We have to do our own scrubbing. We have to do our own cleaning up of our timelines. And I think that's something that people are going to have to do individually, and because you can't let people continue to give you not great information and let that continue showing up on your feed.
I would just add to that that, you know, opinion, wherever you want to get your opinion, fine. But if you're talking about trying to get a factual account of what something is, I tend to trust organizations where there's an editorial screening supervision, and you know, an organization that has something to lose, and we've seen some organizations which have misstated and have ended up having to pay, just to take a random number, $787 million. But the point is, I think that organizations where there's reporters and there's editors and executives above the editors, generally speaking, tends to be more credible and have more to lose by, I'm not talking about opinions now, I'm talking about factual untruths. And the other thing I'd say, and you know, we get asked this a lot, sort of, what should a news consumer do? I always say, and it's not a natural thing, but go, if not every day, often, regularly, to a news outlet that challenges your view of the world. If you like the New York Times, read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. If you like Fox News, you know, find some liberal outlet. You know, the best way to get a sense of how you should, what you want to base your judgments on, is to get both sides of the argument and then make the, like a GPS system, sort of triangulate it and make the decision for yourself.
Can I just add one thing? In addressing your question of the paywall, I do believe that the time will come where media will have to rethink the whole paywall thing. If we are going to be diligent about doing what our calling is, which is informing people, we will have to maybe readjust and increase the way that people can access news with the facts and not have to pay. Because we now know, and that leads to something else that is happening in this landscape, and is those news deserts. And a lot of times those news deserts are in places where people are struggling to put food on the table. But now there's no newsletter, there isn't a newspaper, there isn't a television station, there's nothing where they're at. And so I do believe that the time will come where our business will have to make a decision about how much is business and how much do we honor what our calling is.
Hi, my name is Sonia Ross. I'm a journalist. I would like to hear the panel's opinion of the decision by Paramount to settle with the 47th President of the United States to the tune of $16 million for doing its job on 60 Minutes in interviewing his opponent in last year's election, Kamala Harris, and what you think this portends for press freedom going forward.
Well, I don't like it, but I don't like it, and 5 years ago I would have been outraged by it, and perhaps it's a really telling statement. I mean, it's a very good question. It's a very telling statement about how the world has changed, that I'm not outraged by it anymore. When you see ABC settle with the president for $15 million and issue an apology, which Paramount did not, and I think that's important. When you see Amazon and Prime Video pay $40 million for a documentary on Melania Trump, you know, it's a different world. And you know, on the one hand, I can understand where you would be upset and outraged and say they should have gone to the mat and spent hundreds of millions of dollars and fought it through the courts. And they might well have won, but you know, it's a business decision by a businesswoman who wants to sell her company. And as I say, I don't like it. I understand it in a way that perhaps I wouldn't have 5 years ago. And I do think, just to add, I do think it's important that there was no apology. But $15 million does make a statement, doesn't it?
Thank you. I've spent a lot of time with your colleagues, the Knight Foundation, Aspen Institute, other places where they're sort of grappling with this larger journalistic question, and including polarization. I just spoke at an academic conference. The gap that I continually see missing is the information deluge, encapsulated in my new favorite quote, "I know nothing, you know a different nothing," which is absolutely adorable. But it gets at this element that every single person I meet has got their own personalized feed of news, the only little bit that they can keep up. They're definitely not keeping up with their own stuff, let alone anybody else's. With all respect, like the idea of reading from the other side, like I barely have time to keep up my own side kind of thing. So like there's this ongoing unscalability to the entire information experience that I'm appealing and suggesting and happy to collaborate on. Like, you guys are in the knowledge industry. Like, there's got to be a new way to curate this stuff. And this is all, everything I just said is a pre-AI world. Like, we haven't seen personalization and customization and bespoke behaviors like we're about to see. And just as from my last question, or comment on the question, YouTube produces like 30,000 or uploads 30,000 hours per day or per hour. It doesn't really matter. But that's the curve that we're dealing with for sorting, curating, processing anything. And that's what every one of your readers is dealing with. And that's what every one of your producers is trying to pierce through. So we'd love to hear some serious interaction with that.
I think you make a brilliant point that I think more and more as we look to what the future might be is that I do believe, now this may be just naive optimism, that independence should be something to be leveraged because there is the volume play is, as you suggest, so, and I do look toward AI may actually help, arguably. You could actually think about how to, we at Poynter, we own one of the largest independent news organizations, the Tampa Bay Times, and the whole Poynter concept is independence is actually a value. And what everybody's talking about tonight to some degree is it's really hard to discern any level of independence, and I don't mean just nonpartisan, but I mean truly independent ownership. So I think as a value to be touted, to be marketed, and then you're going to have to show the goods that you truly are independent, that level of transparency and independence is something that we should all drill down on together to sort of see among those 30,000 hours what lane of it could be considered independent so that, and it's okay on the stuff that's not independent as long as you know it, but that independence is something that we need to spend more time thinking about.
And I just wanted to say, kind of from a landscape of a journalist trying to help readers and listeners digest the news, I tell people all the time the information overload that we're feeling, particularly during the Trump administration, it's baked into their playbook, right? If they do a lot of things at one time and overwhelm you, the media can't focus on one thing, you guys at home can't focus on one thing, so it makes it harder to really focus in on one thing to really drill down on what it means and whether it's good or bad. And so, and it's leading to people feeling media burnout, and we're facing people like, I can't watch the news, I can't, it's too much. And I tell people all the time when they tell me that, because they're like, I don't want to offend you because I don't watch CNN anymore, I don't read the paper anymore. I'm like, I get it. And if you have to log off for your own mental sanity, of course, do that. But also know this is the intended consequence, is that people do disengage and the eyes aren't on what's doing, or they feel overwhelmed so they can't wrap their head around what's going on. That is part of the playbook. So if you want to, at some point, if you care about what's going on, you've got to kind of figure out a way to streamline your feed or figure out how you're going to focus and what you're going to engage in and what you're not going to engage in, as opposed to engaging in nothing.
We got 5 more minutes, so let's get a few more questions.
My question gets to restoring trust in news organizations. I started in journalism in the early 90s, and I remember as I was leaving journalism school asking a professor, well, do I have to take a test to get certified? You know, is there a badge? You know, how are people going to know they can trust me? And he said, nothing like that. But of course, those were simpler times. Back then, the fact that you had the job with the news organization meant that people could trust you because they knew all of the news organizations. We're so far from that now. When I talk to friends and family who say, I don't know who I can trust, I usually tell them, if you haven't heard of it, you need to research it. If you've heard of it, you can probably trust it. And I'll drop the names of any of the places you all have worked, or the Washington Post, or the New York Times, or state newspapers, the AP. And I am shocked at the amount of people who scoff at all of that, who say, we can't trust the establishment media. So I wonder, where do we go from here? How do we restore trust?
Chris, trust. What do you think? Discuss.
I'm the wrong guy to ask this question because I'm an establishment type. And you know, when you were sort of saying, well, how do we know to trust you? I wouldn't trust you if, frankly, if you had a feed, and not that I'd ever read it because I'm not on social media, but if I were and I just saw you, you know, you could be somebody sitting in your house or your basement and you're just giving me a bunch of stuff. The fact that you would work for a news organization and that you've got editors and you've got editors above the editors and that your copy or your commentary has to be approved by somebody would give me a level of trust because I would trust the organization and therefore I would think that they're screening you, and if you're, you know, going off and making things up, you aren't going to last at that organization very long. You know, there are certain people out there who are not part of organizations who I find their takes interesting, and you know, and I'm interested in what they have to say, but I certainly wouldn't go to them for news. I would go to them for opinion or analysis, but not to tell me what is actually going on in the world.
You talked about getting, how do we get the trust back? And please, I'm not being disrespectful. I just want to just share something with you. I'm beginning to wonder if that is not just a narrative that a section of our country wants people to believe that the press cannot be trusted, but that the American people do not trust the media. I'm not sure that that really is true. The reason I say that is because my friends here who work in local news. They have the trust of their community. Because when there is a disaster or anything, they're tuned in to local news. And they tune in to the radio, to their local stations. And so I would caution everyone in this room, including myself, not to fall trap to what may be a narrative that consistently is saying that we cannot be trusted, none of us are trustworthy. One of the advantages that I came out of local news, I came out of Channel 51 in Miami, and one of the advantages that local news has, and TIA also has that advantage, is that there is consistency, and that the turnover is not as high as you see maybe on cable news. And that generates trust. That's my take on that.
One more question.
There's a gentleman.
Thanks. When Chris started, and in fact, when I started, owners of news outlets seemed to have an understanding that they had an obligation, because they were owners of news outlets, to protect the ability to gather news and report it. And what I see, particularly in things like Paramount, is not only a failure to understand that, but an deliberate disregard of it, because it serves the interest of the owner to disregard it, without regard for the cost to society or to the people who work for them and gather news. How do we deal with that without completely weakening democracy?
I think it's a very valid point, and I can just look at it over the course of my lifetime and my career, and seeing what was going on with my father, that back when I really became conscious of news, I guess back in the 1960s, and the networks were run by people like Bill Paley at CBS and the Sarnoff at NBC, there was a sense at that time that news was kind of a public service, and that you made your money on I Love Lucy and and the entertainment shows, and the news business was kind of what the price of doing business, that you did the news in a straight way to the degree humanly possible, and you didn't care about making money. You didn't want to lose money, but you didn't particularly care about making money in the news business. And I'm talking now specifically from my experience with big television networks. That has changed. There's no question about it. And part of what you see when you talk about networks, not so much the networks as the cable channels going in a specific direction to the right or to the left, is they're seeking an audience, and they're finding in this increasingly polarized society that the audience increasingly demands news that they agree with, news that fosters their position. And I take your point, which is that it is bad for democracy if you're sitting there trying to play to an audience and not trying to do just the very best you possibly can under kind of old-fashioned journalistic standards. I don't have a solution for it, because the genie's out of the bottle. There's money to be made now by pandering or playing to however you want to say it, playing to an audience. It's a much harder thing. What's going on with Paramount now isn't that, and what went on with Disney isn't that, and what went on with YouTube's not, or rather Amazon and Prime was not that. That was a different thing, which was having to deal with the power reality of Washington today. That was a business decision. It wasn't a playing to an audience for popularity. And I don't have a good answer. How do we prevent it? I'm not sure. I share your concern, is I guess the best I can say.
Well, listen, all of you are here because you care deeply about facts, journalism, complicated times, as we said. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to the library. How about a round of applause for our wonderful panelists? Thank you all.